Hello, everyone, and welcome to the third talk in our Modern Distributed Development with VS Code series. Today, I'll be talking about what VS Code has to offer for C# developers. In this talk, we will look at a couple of things. Namely, we'll look at VS Code's capabilities, understanding what exactly VS Code can offer. We'll take a look at a very simple Hello World console application in VS Code that's going to make use of .NET Core. And then, because we don't want to leave anyone behind, we'll also look at the kind of support that's available for some legacy solutions. So, the main reason why we have this whole series, we're discussing VS Code. What is it? It's a completely free source code editor. But what makes VS Code a special source code editor is that it also supports some features that were traditionally only found in complete IDEs. And we'll take a look at what some of these features are today. So out of the box, VS Code supports debugging of C# applications that are running either on .NET Core or on Mono. And many standard C# project types are actually not recognized by VS Code. An example of a non-supported project type is ASP.NET MVC application, even though ASP.NET Core is supported out of the box. So when you're looking at whether you can use this for your project or not, it's very important to see whether VS Code will actually support you to the extent that you would need it to. Looking at further support, VS Code harnesses the power of both Roslyn and OmniSharp. So if you're not familiar with either one of these, Roslyn provides open source C# and Visual Basic compilers, and it also comes with the rich code analysis APIs. It enables building code analysis tools with the same APIs that are actually used by Visual Studio, and thus creating a familiar developer experience in terms of its capabilities. OmniSharp is actually an entire set of tooling, editor integration, and libraries that together create an entire ecosystem that actually allows you to have great programming experience, regardless of your editor or operating system of choice, regardless of which one you actually decide to go with. Now, with these two, Visual Studio Code offers support for .NET Core projects, MS Build projects, and as well as supports C# scripts, CSX files. That's not all. One of the most powerful things about Visual Studio Code is that it's open source. So it has allowed for a rich ecosystem of community extensions to exist. On their site, they've actually got a live polling service that checks the most popular C# extensions that are downloaded mostly. And these are the three that I always have and are currently actually rated top on their site as well. So it's C#, which is by Microsoft, Code Runner, and then an extension pack which puts together a few other of my favorite extensions to use. We'll take a look at what some of these actually end up giving you. But I've got all three of these installed on my Visual Studio Code, and I'll show you how I put them to use. So we're going to get started with a very simple Hello World application and take a look at the features that Visual Studio Code has to create a good developer experience. Getting started. So after you've downloaded and installed Visual Studio Code, there's a few more things that you need to do. So C# language support is actually optional and doesn't come prepackaged with Visual Studio Code as support for, say, JavaScript does. So the first thing that you'll need to do is download the .NET Core SDK. Now, this SDK also includes the runtime, and your next step would then be to install the C# extension from VS Code Marketplace. Now, you can either find this from Visual Studio Code's extensions tab, or you can go online and it will then allow you to install this. If you open a C# file, Visual Studio Code actually picks up that this is a C# file and will then make suggestions on the best extensions to add. Unsurprisingly, the C# extension is the first one that it will recommend. So I'd like to show you a couple of things before we start talking about good language support that has to come with any IDE. So if we take a look at this, I've got a folder here, absolutely empty folder called C# TechAway. And to get started, once you've downloaded all of your dependencies, to create a simple new C# console application, I simply have to type in .NET new, .NET is one word, .NET new console, right? And then using the C# or the .NET CLI rather, it will actually go and create a bunch of files for me and install a few more dependencies. So you can see that it has also created a C# project file for me over here. Now, if you open up program.cs, you'll see that it has created this file for me. It's a simple C# file. And over here, it then asks me that the required assets to build and debug are missing from this file. Should I install them? Yes, I'd like you to add all of these for me. Now these are added under this VS Code folder over here for me. We'll touch just a tiny bit as to how these things actually operate or what you need to change in there. The most important part is that you've got this hello world over here. Now that we've created our new console application, we've looked at the different files that are in there. The next thing to do is to actually run it. And for this, we simply need .NET run. It should print hello world if everything is done correctly. And there we go, hello world. So just to show you that this is actually working, I'll just introduce myself there and say hello world, I'm lucky. If you run that again, you can see in my terminal, it should print out hello world, I'm lucky. Great. Couple of more, there's a few more features that I'd like to show you. So let's start by creating a function. Let's call this function greet, right? So you have to greet elders, and I'm guessing that most of you are my elders, despite what people might think. So let's make this a void function and greet. So this greeting, let's actually move this function over there, and in here we can then call greet. So as you can see, it's got code linting and tells me when things are missing. There we're missing a semicolon, and we've now got it in there. It also tells you that this function is referenced in one place. You can peek as to where it's being used, and if we had a few of them, which I'll show you in a second, you can actually peek at where all of these are. So simple. Let's say I'm lucky, but let's make this greet function actually take in a name. So I want you to this is C#, I can't do these Street Fighter things. So it'll take in a string called name. Let's remove the underscore actually, and here $, right? I believe that's how we do it in C#. So it's $, and we'll make it name there. Cool. Hello world, I'm lucky. And if we greet here, it now tells us that there's no argument that corresponds to the required formal parameter name of greet. Cool. And then it also will give us parameter hinting. So it tells us that this requires a string called name. So I want to greet as lucky. I'll pass it as a string. Or better yet, let's create another static method that will return a string, and let's call this getName, right? And this getName will declare a variable called name to return, because it's very explicit, and this will be lucky. Cool. Now again, IntelliSense tells you exactly what's wrong in here. So the name is assigned, but its value is never used. So let's use the name. Let's just return name to return. There's our string. It's happy, 0 references. It's not used anyway. So instead here, let's use this feature of C# and we'll say a gotten name, aptly named parameter, is equal to get name in there, and that will return a string. Shows you this returns a string. That string will then be assigned to a string gotten name, and instead of greeting lucky, we'll simply greet with the gotten name. Cool. Fairly simple parameter, fairly simple piece of code, and we can greet twice because we're fancy like that. And let's just greet as BVD, right? And we can see that we've got these two functions here, or we are using this greet function in these two places. If we click on the references, we can actually peek at them and we can start navigating where this is actually being used. So if this was in different files with some really complex logic around it, we could peek into these different places where this is used without actually needing to know exactly where that file is or navigating to that file. If I double click here, it'll take me to that. Double click there, it'll take me to that file itself. And then I'm now here where it's being used, and I want to go back to the definition. Simple. Right click, go to definition, or press F12. And what this allows you, or what this affords you, is that in today's development environment, you rarely ever work with one programming language. You rarely ever work with one piece of technology. And by using VS Code for all of these different things, you then streamline your developer experience. It means that regardless of what language you're using, your shortcuts and your tools will almost always be the same. And VS Code does that really, really, really well, especially with its built-in Git. You can even see who did what when. So if this was committed code, it would actually be showing me that this is used in one place and this was last changed by Jason or someone else on your team. Cool. But to really test a development environment, it's important to be able to debug code. So let's set a breakpoint there after we've set our name to return. Firstly, let's just make sure that all of this works. So let's remove that breakpoint. Let's run .NET run, and let's just make sure that all of this is in place. That greets hello world, I'm lucky, hello world, I'm BBD. Cool. Very useful use of functions. Very practical use of functions. Cool. Let's set a breakpoint over there, get name, and if you go to your debugger, and you can see that we've got .NET Core launched, and if we launch in there we go, breakpoint. That's it. That is absolutely it. Now in your file over here, I've seen some people struggle with getting the debugger running correctly, and sometimes it's because of the configuration that they have here is actually misaligned. So if you're struggling to debug this, you probably inherited this configuration, and you might sometimes have to change this integrated console and change it to integrated terminal. But mine, as you saw, I allowed VS Code to create it for me, and hence it worked simply straight out of the box. Now, while I'm debugging, I can inspect what the variable names are. Then lucky has been set to lucky, and I know that what I'm returning here is going to be lucky. I'm going to try and avoid using keyboard shortcuts so that you can see exactly what I'm doing. So I can step over that line and I return back there. And now I can see that my gotten name has been set to lucky. So when I greet, I'm going to greet with the name lucky. Cool. Then we can allow that to run, and we can clearly see how that works. But that's not all. Debugging requires sometimes for you to keep your eye on a number of things. And for that, we've got a few more features. So over here, you can watch your local variables. So you can see that in the scope, there's only one variable, which is named to return. And perhaps over here, I should create another one. So let's set my date, and let's set it to new date time. Let's set it to today. I think this is how you do it. Today, am I correct? New date time dot today. This should be fine. New date time dot today, date time dot today. Cool. Let's test this and see. It's been a while since I've written C# code, so let's just restart this debugger. It's complaining. Abort. And this, let's abort. Let's just set it to a new date time. So date time, my date is equal to new date time. There we go. And then let's put it to use. So let's just print 2 of these, and then let's do this. So and just say the time is, and let's set this to my date. Let's just say the date is. Cool. Set that to my date, and let's save that. And now that we've got multiple variables in here, we've set my date, we can start this debugger. I should probably save that file. Or it auto-saved for me. I didn't even know that it would do that. So there, it's building, and we're now running. So it hits my first breakpoint, and I can step through it. And now, because I've got a debugger, a debug console, I can also change variables in here to see the behavior based on different values. So if I say I'd like to set name equals unlucky, let's go with that, and we can see that now when over here I can inspect and see that that name variable is now changed to unlucky. But more so, in my local variables window, I can see all the variables in that scope because those are the local ones. And what I can also see is that the last variable to be changed, the one that's recently been changed, is now highlighted, and the value is highlighted to now changing to lucky. So in here you see that it had printed hello world, I'm lucky, based on name. And now if I step over that, we can see that it builds, it prints out rather, hello world, I'm unlucky. And now we've got a new date time. So I set the date time to be the default date. So if I step over that, we can see that my date is set to that default date, the first day of the first month of the first year, first day of the week. And now if I'd like to change that to say today, I believe we can do this in C# date time dot today. So what I can do is I can take a look at date time itself and see that there are some static members, max value, min value, and there we've got today. It's a static member, so this should work. There we go. My date is now set to the 16th of July, because this is American format, and the time is just not set there at all because I specified the date today. And now I can see all of that, and I can also watch all of that in the window, and now I can go on to print all of that. We run that twice, and we can see now that the second time around it went back to the default date because I didn't change it in the window, but the first time around I actually changed it in the window, and that set up my date to be today's date. This also allows you to navigate all of your different breakpoints, allowing you to enable and disable different things that you wanted to break on. So if you wanted to break on all exceptions, to stop your code so that you can see what the problem is, you can check that, or user unhandled exceptions which should be on, so that you can figure out where you're messing up with your code. And then you can see the different breakpoints that you've set up as part of your debugging process. And another cool thing that we can do is that we can then, I'm going to remove this line. I'm going to remove this line as well, so that we just run once over this. And I'm going to break over here. I'm going to set a conditional breakpoint. So we're going to edit this breakpoint and say only break if the name is unlucky. Right? So there's our breakpoint. We can see the expression, and it tells us that the file is modified. We need to save it and restart the debugging session, which is perfectly fine. So I start that. It's running. There we go. Let's just continue. So there, the name is set to lucky, and continue. It finishes, it terminates, and it printed out hello world, I'm lucky. Didn't even wait for anything. But now, if we change this lucky to unlucky, we save and we debug that. And we continue past that breakpoint. Let's just run through. We see that it now breaks because it has met the condition of name being unlucky, which means that if your code is breaking only under specific conditions, you can actually set breakpoints when you're iterating over different scenarios to only break under that condition, allowing you greater power over your debugging session. And there are multiple ways to see and keep track of everything that is happening on your console. So we've spoken about how good developer experience in terms of supporting a language is hinged on sufficient code delegation. We've shown that you can go to all the references, you can go to all the implementations of the different things. Code refactoring, I'll show you over here that if we've got, for instance, getName, which is used in one other place, and I now want to refactor this and call it something else. So we can rename this and simply call it get my name. And the cool thing here is that this is consistent with all of the other features or with all of the other language support that comes with VS Code, which means that as a developer, regardless of what tech stack you're starting to use, all of your shortcuts and all of the things that enhance your developer experience will actually be streamlined by using VS Code. Code completion, we saw where it helped me with this, code linting, code parameters. If I call greet over here, it showed me here that I need a variable called name of type string. So this again is helping me creating better developer experience. We saw how we could set our breakpoints, the different ways, how we can navigate these breakpoints, and of course, watching these breakpoints and seeing the different values that change based on certain conditions that we set. But everything I've shown you is based on .NET Core. And if you're building a new application, this is a really, really great place to start. But not all of us are fortunate enough to be starting brand new projects ourselves. A lot of the projects that we work on at BBD have been in existence for years and years and years on end. And it's important to never leave people behind. So a lot of the .NET framework applications will work simply out of the box using one of the versions of Visual Studio. But even though I can actively see Microsoft trying to limit their support for things that work optimally on Visual Studio because they don't want to self-compete, you can actually get .NET Framework solutions working in VS Code, and you just need a few more steps. So firstly, you need to download and install the build tools for Visual Studio 2019, which is the latest, and using those build tools, you can then configure Visual Studio Code to actually run, build, and allow you to debug those solutions. The next step would be then to inside your VS Code, your .VS Code folder, to have a task.json file, which is automatically created for you, but you will then have to configure it so that it points to your solution file, and that It has your project's configuration, such as the steps and your platform targets, etc. And the trick here is that you would have to add parameters as argument to MS Builder instead of modifying the project file itself. And then the next step would be to configure your launch.json to attach to the process in order to allow you to debug. And then the next step is to start debugging in a way that is consistent throughout all of your projects. I will add a step-by-step guide to how you can get your .NET Framework solutions working to the description of this video over here on YouTube. And so if you do need to get a .NET Framework solution running, you can follow the step-by-step guide, and that will help you specifically tailor it to your solution. That's it from me. Thank you very much for watching this video. Thank you very much for following the hashtag TechAwayThursdays. We hope to see you soon again for another awesome video on modern development with the tools that we have at our disposal. Thank you.